Hey everyone, and welcome. If you've ever dreamed about growing your own crisp, juicy apples right in your own backyard, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're kicking off the very first part of our series on how to make that happen. So, let's just dive right in.
I mean, seriously, who hasn't pictured themselves just walking outside, picking a perfect apple straight off the branch? It's one of those simple pleasures, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that dream is way more achievable than you probably think.
But here's the secret, and it's something a lot of people miss. The most important work you're going to do happens long before your shovel even touches the dirt. Getting that foundation right is everything, and that's what we're going to focus on today.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to walk through 5 key steps. Finding that perfect sun-drenched spot, prepping the soil, choosing the right kind of tree for your space, then we'll get to the single most critical detail when you plant it, and finally, making sure you actually get fruit. Think of it as your roadmap to success.
First things first, we've got to find the perfect spot. Just like in real estate, it is all about location, location, location. Where you decide to plant your tree is honestly just as important as how you plant it.
So what's the magic number you need to remember? It's 6 to 8. That is the absolute minimum number of hours of direct, unfiltered sunlight your apple tree needs every single day. Apple trees are total sun worshippers. That sunlight is the fuel they need to produce a big, beautiful crop of delicious apples.
Okay, so beyond just sunlight, you got to think about the soil and even the air. Your tree, it wants well-drained, kind of loamy soil, not that heavy clay where water just sits and turns into a puddle. You also want to avoid any low-lying frost pockets in your yard. Those spots where cold air settles? That can zap your blossoms in the spring. Good drainage prevents root rot, and getting all this right just maximizes your fruit and minimizes those frustrating fungal diseases.
So, we found our perfect spot. Now let's talk about preparing that foundation. We've got to make sure the ground itself is going to be a super welcoming home for our tree's roots.
And here's another magic number for you. 6.0 to 7.0. This is the sweet spot, the optimal pH range for your soil. Think of it like this. If the pH is way too high or way too low, it's like all the good nutrients in the soil are locked away in a safe. The right pH? Well, that's the combination that unlocks the safe, making all those nutrients available for the tree's roots to soak up.
Which brings me to this, and it's non-negotiable, folks. Test your soil before you plant. You can grab a simple kit at any garden center. I'm telling you, it is so much easier to fix pH or nutrient issues now before there's a tree in the way. It's a 5-minute job that can save you years of headaches down the road.
All right, our site is picked, the soil is prepped, and now it is time for the fun part, choosing your tree. But when you go to the nursery, you'll see a bunch of options, and it's really important to understand what you're actually buying.
Now get this, because it's really cool. A modern apple tree isn't just one plant. It's actually 2 different plants fused together. The top part, that's called the scion, and that's the variety that makes the fruit you want. A Honeycrisp or a Granny Smith. The bottom part is the rootstock, and that's what controls the tree's size. And that little bump where they're joined together, that's called the Graft Union.
And believe me, that rootstock is a total game changer. For pretty much any home garden, you want a tree on a dwarf rootstock, period. Why? Well, just look at this. Dwarf trees are perfect for smaller yards. They start giving you fruit way sooner, we're talking just 3 to 4 years, and they're so much easier to prune and pick from. A standard tree, on the other hand, can get huge and become a real beast to manage.
Okay, we've got our spot, our soil is ready, we've picked out the perfect dwarf tree. Now, for the main event, getting that tree into the ground. And listen up, because there is one detail here that you absolutely, positively cannot get wrong.
The basics are actually pretty simple. You're going to dig a hole that's 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball. But, and this is important, no deeper. This tells the roots to spread out, not dive straight down. Plop the tree in the center and fill the hole back in with the same soil you just dug out. And please, whatever you do, do not add fertilizer to the planting hole. It can seriously burn those delicate young roots. And here it is. This is the single most important rule of planting. That graft union, that little bump we talked about, it must end up 2 to 4 inches above the final soil level. If you bury it, the top part of the tree, the scion, it'll grow its own roots and it'll totally bypass the dwarfing rootstock. Your carefully chosen small tree will turn into a massive, standard-sized giant. You don't want that.
Okay, the tree is in the ground correctly. We're done, right? Mission accomplished? Well, almost. Now we have to make sure it will actually produce apples for us. And that means we have to play a little bit of matchmaker.
Here's the deal, put as simply as possible. An apple tree cannot pollinate itself. It's not a solo act. To get fruit, pollen from a totally different apple variety has to get to its flowers. A single, lonely apple tree might give you some beautiful spring blossoms, but it will never, ever give you a single apple.
So here's what you need to know. You have to plant at least one other different variety of apple trees somewhere within about 50 to 100 feet. You also have to check that their bloom times overlap. You can find that info on the tree tag. And here's a big warning. Some varieties like Jonah Gold or Mutsu, they're called triploids. They have sterile pollen and can't pollinate anything. If you plant one of those, you're going to need 2 other pollinator trees to make sure everyone gets pollinated.
And that's really it. By focusing on these fundamentals, the right site, the right soil, the right tree, and the right planting technique, you have laid the perfect foundation for a healthy, happy, and productive apple tree. You are well on your way to that dream of homegrown fruit. Happy planting, and thanks for hanging out with me for part 1. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into the really satisfying work of nurturing a young apple tree, guiding it from just a little sapling into a fruit-bearing superstar right in your own backyard.
You know, growing your own apples might seem super complicated, but it really just comes down to a few key decisions and some consistent care. We're going to walk through the whole thing together, starting right from the moment you bring that tree home.
Okay, so a future full of amazing harvests? It all begins with a great foundation. Getting the planting right is probably the single most important thing you can do for your tree's long-term health. So let's get into it. First things first, choosing the right spot. This is your first really critical decision. I mean, your tree absolutely needs 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. That's non-negotiable for getting fruit and fighting off diseases. And that well-drained soil, that's not just a suggestion. If the roots sit in water, they can rot, and that's basically a death sentence for the tree.
Now here's where things get really interesting. One tiny detail. We're talking just a few inches of placement can determine whether you end up with a nice, manageable backyard tree or a 30-foot giant you can't even begin to control.
So here's the key. Find this little bump near the base of the trunk. That right there is the Graft Union. It's where the apple variety you actually want is attached to a specific root system that controls its size. You have to keep that union 2 to 4 inches above the ground. If you bury it, the top part will just grow its own roots, completely bypassing the dwarfing rootstock, and poof, your small tree is on its way to becoming a giant.
All right, once your tree is in the ground, that first year is all about establishing a really strong root system. I want you to think of it as the tree's toddler phase. It just needs consistent attention to really thrive.
And the most important attention you can give it is water. For that entire first growing season, from about May to October, your tree needs about 1 inch of water every week. This isn't a when you remember it kind of task. That consistent moisture is absolutely critical for the roots to grow out and anchor the tree for life.
And when it comes to feeding your tree, timing is everything. You want to apply fertilizer in the early spring, right before the buds start to break. This gives the tree a perfect boost of energy exactly when it's waking up. But if you fertilize in the summer, you're going to encourage a sudden flush of weak, tender growth that won't have time to harden off before winter, making it super susceptible to frost damage. Not good. Now for the part that can be the most intimidating for people, pruning. But try not to think of it as just cutting things off. I want you to think of it more like you're designing a strong, productive structure for your tree's entire future. You've basically got 2 main windows to get your pruning done. Dormant pruning, which you do in late winter, is for making your big structural cuts. This is when you're basically building the tree's skeleton. Then there's summer pruning, which is more for fine-tuning, like removing those super fast-growing vertical shoots, called water sprouts, and opening up the canopy to let that precious sunlight reach the fruit. For most apple trees, the goal is what's called a central leader system. You're trying to establish one strong, dominant trunk running right up the center with branches spiraling out from it. That classic pyramid or Christmas tree shape is incredibly strong and lets sunlight hit all parts of the tree.
Now, as you're picking your main scaffold branches, those are the primary limbs that are going to form the tree's structure. You have to pay close attention to the angle they make with the trunk. A narrow, V-shaped angle is a huge weak point. Bark gets trapped inside, it never forms a strong connection, and it's almost guaranteed to split under the weight of fruit or ice. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
So the ideal angle you're looking for is somewhere between 45 and 60 degrees. You want a nice wide angle.
Branches like this aren't just way stronger, they're also much more fruitful. It's a win-win.
So when you head out to prune, don't just start snipping randomly. There's a method to the madness. Always follow this order. Step 1, clean house. Get rid of anything that's dead, damaged, or looks diseased. Step 2, fix structural problems like branches that are crossing and rubbing or growing straight down. And only after you've done all that should you start thinning things out to improve light and air circulation.
And here it is, the golden rule of pruning. Restraint. Seriously, if you get overzealous and cut off too much at once, the tree will basically panic. Its response is to send up this crazy thicket of weak, vertical water sprouts that don't produce any fruit, and you'll spend years trying to correct that mistake.
All right, you've planted it, you've pruned it, so now let's talk about the ongoing maintenance that's going to keep your tree healthy and productive for years and years to come.
Okay, this next step is going to feel completely wrong. I'm telling you, it feels counterintuitive, but trust me, it's the secret to getting a great harvest every single year. See, apple trees often set way more fruit than they can possibly support. This leads to a huge crop of tiny apples one year and then almost nothing the next. It's a cycle called biennial bearing. So, to prevent this boom and bust cycle, you have to thin the fruit. A few weeks after the flowers fade, when the baby apples are about the size of a marble, you're going to go through and remove all but one apple from each cluster. Usually you'll leave the biggest one in the middle. That's called the king fruit.
And you're not done yet. After you've thinned the clusters, look along the whole branch and make sure the apples that are left are spaced about 6 to 8 inches apart. I know, it seems drastic, but this gives each one the space and the resources it needs to grow into a big, beautiful, high-quality apple.
And finally, here are just a few simple things you can do in the fall to tuck your tree in for winter. Painting the trunk white with some diluted latex paint that actually prevents the bark from splitting because of sun scald on those bright, cold winter days. And that hardware cloth guard around the trunk, that's non-negotiable. It is the only sure way to protect that tender bark from hungry rabbits and voles over the winter.
So after all that foundational work and all that consistent care and the careful shaping, what's the big payoff?
It's this. This is what it's all about. A healthy tree just loaded with fruit. Every single step we've covered today, from keeping that graft union exposed, to watering consistently, to choosing those wide branch angles, it's all a direct investment in your future harvest. It's a whole system, where each careful step builds on the last one.
So there you have it. You now have the complete blueprint for success. That dream of walking into your backyard and picking a crisp, perfect apple from your very own tree? Yeah, that is totally within your reach. Happy growing!
Hey there. Ever look at your apple tree and wonder why one year it's giving you a mountain of apples and the next you're lucky if you get a handful? Well, if you're sick of that whole boom and bust cycle, you've come to the right place. Let's figure out how to get you that perfect harvest every single year.
I mean, does this sound familiar? One year, your tree is practically groaning under the weight of all the apples, and you're thinking, yes, I finally figured it out. But then, the very next year, crickets. You know, it's a super common problem, but the good news is we're going to solve it today. And yeah, this picture just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, that's your boom year. The branch is sagging, it's crowded with a ton of small, kind of sad apples. Then on the right, the bust here, that exact same branch is totally empty. It's so frustrating, right? But believe it or not, this isn't random. It's actually all about the tree's biology. So this whole phenomenon actually has a name, and just understanding what it's called is the first step to beating it. It's called biennial bearing. So what on earth is actually going on inside your tree? Okay, so here's the deal. During that massive boom year, your tree literally dumps all of its energy into making all that fruit. I mean, it works so hard that it has absolutely nothing left in the tank to form the flower buds it needs for the next season. It's basically a classic case of burnout, but for a tree. Now, what's so cool about this is that even though it feels like this huge impossible problem, the fix is actually surprisingly simple. It's a technique that all the pro orchardists use, but it's something you can totally do in your own backyard.
And that secret, my friends, is hand thinning. Now, this isn't just about getting bigger, tastier apples this year. It's about you having a little chat with your tree and saying, hey, buddy, let's save some energy so we can do this all over again next year. Seriously, it's the single most important thing you can do to break that boom and bust cycle.
So how do you actually do it? Well, timing is absolutely crucial here. You've got to do this within about 4 to 6 weeks after the tree has bloomed, when the little fruits are maybe the size of a dime. You'll see these little clusters of baby apples. What you want to do is find the biggest one right in the center. They call that the king fruit, and leave it. Then you just gently twist or snip off all the other little ones in that cluster.
Now for the golden rule. You want to space the apples you leave behind so they're about 6 to 8 inches apart all along the branches. And listen, I know it's going to feel like you're taking off way too many apples. It's heartbreaking, but you have to trust the process. This lets the remaining apples get big and juicy, and it makes sure your tree has plenty of gas in the tank for next year.
All right, awesome. So you've thinned your apples, you've broken that pesky biennial cycle, and your tree is all set for a perfect, steady harvest. But wait, you're not done yet. Now you have to play defense and protect that amazing fruit from everything out there that wants a bite before you do.
And that brings us to our next big challenge, the wild world of pests and diseases. We're talking about everything from the codling moth, the classic worm in the apple, to some really nasty infections. But hold on, don't just reach for the heavy-duty sprays. There's a much smarter way to handle this.
And that smarter way is called Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. This isn't about declaring all-out chemical warfare on your garden. Think of it more like a whole philosophy. It's a strategic game plan that uses a bunch of different tactics to keep your tree healthy with the least possible impact on everything else.
So your IPM toolkit really boils down to these 3 main things. First, we'll talk about good sanitation. That's the foundation. Then we'll get into some really clever pest control. And finally, we'll cover how to handle one of the scariest diseases you might run into.
And I'm not kidding. The most powerful first step you can take in your IPM strategy is totally 100% free. It's just about good old-fashioned housekeeping. A clean orchard is a healthy orchard.
And here's why that's so important. All those fallen leaves and old, wrinkly, mummified fruits on the ground, they're basically luxury winter condos for pests and fungal spores. So by just raking all that stuff up and getting rid of it in the fall, you're wiping out a huge chunk of next year's problems before they even get a chance to start. Okay, now for the pests that are already flying around. Instead of just trying to zap them with insecticides, one of the coolest organic methods is to just create a physical barrier. You're basically putting a disguise on your apples so pests like the codling moth can't even tell they're food. And you do this with something called kaolin clay. It's just a natural mineral powder you mix with water and spray on the tree. It creates this fine white film all over the leaves and fruit. It doesn't hurt the bugs at all. They just fly in, see this weird white powdery thing instead of a delicious apple, get totally confused, and then just fly away. How cool is that?
Now, while a lot of diseases can be managed with prevention, there is one bacterial infection that is, well, it's a real emergency. And if you see its telltale sign, you have to drop everything and act fast.
If you see this, you need to pay attention. It's a branch tip that just wilts, turns black or brown, and curls over like a shepherd's crook. This is fire blight, and it is a highly contagious disease that can literally kill your entire tree if you don't deal with it right away.
And when I say deal with it, I don't mean just snipping off the dead-looking part. That's not enough. The bacteria is already way down in the wood, far below what you can see. You must cut that branch off at least 8 to 12 inches into the healthy green wood to make sure you got it all.
And listen, this next part is maybe the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. If you don't do this, you're actually just making things worse. After every single cut you make, you have to dip your pruning shears in a 10% bleach solution. I'm serious. Every single cut. Otherwise, you're just spreading that bacteria all over the tree with your own tools.
All right, so let's tie this all together, shall we? You can see that by just understanding a few key ideas, you can really take control of your apple tree and go from being a frustrated beginner to a super confident backyard orchardist.
So remember, what's the path to that perfect harvest? First, thin your fruit so you get a great crop every year. Second, keep your orchard space tidy to stop problems before they even start. Third, use smart, gentle tools like kaolin clay. And finally, if you ever see fire blight, act fast and clean those tools. That's it. Following these steps will make all the difference in the world.
You now have the pro gardener's playbook. You're in the driver's seat. You have the power to manage not just the quantity of your apples, but the quality and the health of your tree for years to come. So when you look at your garden now, what's one new thing you're going to try this season?
Hey, thanks so much for watching this explainer. If you learned something useful today, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next one. Happy gardening!
So you're thinking about planting an apple tree. Awesome. Today, we're going to walk through the most important year in that tree's life, the very first one. We'll cover everything from getting it in the ground to making sure it survives its first winter, setting you up for years and years of amazing fruit.
I mean, just imagine it, walking out into your yard and picking a perfectly crisp, juicy apple right off the branch. It sounds like the dream, right? Well, it's actually way more achievable than you might think. But the journey to that perfect apple, it starts long before you ever see a blossom.
And here's the thing, the success of your apple tree really is decided from day one. Seriously, the choices you make in this first year, they're going to set the stage for decades to come, affecting everything from its health to how many apples you'll be getting.
Okay, so let's start at the very, very beginning. Planting isn't just about digging a hole and plopping a tree in. It's about giving your tree the absolute best head start in its new home.
Before you even grab a shovel, you've got to find the perfect spot. Your tree has a few non-negotiables. It needs tons of sun, at least 6 to 8 hours. The soil needs to drain well so its roots don't rot. And this is a big one, it needs a friend. Apple trees need a different apple variety nearby for cross-pollination. Nobody, no fruit. It's really as simple as that.
Now the actual planting part is pretty straightforward. You're going to dig a wide, shallow hole. If you've got a bare root tree, let those roots soak in a bucket of water for an hour or so to rehydrate. Then you place the tree in the hole and fill it back in with the very same soil you dug out. And notice that last point. Resist the urge to add fertilizer right away. It can actually burn those brand new, delicate roots.
Okay, I want you to burn this number into your brain. 2 to 4 inches. This is without a doubt the single most important measurement when you plant your apple tree. So what is it?
So here it is. Your apple tree is actually 2 different trees fused into one. You've got the root system, the rootstock, and then the apple variety you actually want, the scion, grafted on top. That little bulge where they meet, that's the Graft Union. If you bury that thing, the top part will start growing its own roots, and your nice little dwarf tree will try to become a 40-foot monster. So you have to keep that union 2 to 4 inches above the soil.
All right, the tree is in the ground. Good job. Now, let's fast forward to its first spring and summer. This is when all the growth really kicks in. And your job is basically to be a good support system, helping it build strong roots and healthy branches.
And really, it all boils down to these 4 things. Keep it watered, about an inch a week, especially in that first year. Feed it just once, early in the spring, and that's it. A little pruning helps give it a good shape. And if you're lucky enough to get some fruit right away, you need to thin them out. That way the tree can focus its energy on growing strong, not just making a few little apples.
So after a season of good care, you might just start seeing some fruit. Now, a huge harvest is probably still a few years off, but knowing exactly when to pick is key for getting the best flavor. And for that, we've got a super simple 3-point check that gets it right every time. You know, it's a trickier question than it sounds. If you pick too early, the apple's going to be sour and starchy. But pick too late and you get a mealy, soft apple that won't store well. Don't worry though. The tree gives you 3 really clear signals.
First up, I want you to completely ignore the red blush. That's just a sunburn, and it doesn't mean it's ripe. Instead, look at what's called the ground color. That's the background shade of the skin, right up near the stem. You're looking for it to change from a definite green to a creamy pale yellow. That is your first big clue.
Signal number 2 is the detachment test. A ripe apple will practically fall right into your hand. You should never have to pull or yank on it. Just cup the apple, lift it up towards the branch, and give it a tiny little twist. If it's ready, that stem will snap off clean. If you feel any resistance at all, walk away. Give it a few more days.
And finally, the ultimate proof is on the inside. Yep, you're going to have to sacrifice 1 apple for the team. Cut it open and check out the seeds. If they're white or tan, it's not ready. A fully mature, ripe apple will have deep, dark brown seeds. When you've got that yellow ground color, easy detachment, and dark seeds, you've hit the jackpot.
Okay, so you've enjoyed the harvest. Now comes maybe the most important job of all for a young tree, just surviving. Its first winter is a huge test, and there are 2 major threats you absolutely have to defend against. This is where your protection makes all the difference.
The first threat is a sneaky one. It's called sun scald. See, on a bright winter day, the sun can heat up the dark bark enough to kind of wake up the cells underneath. But then, as soon as the sun goes down, the temperature plummets and those active cells freeze and literally burst.
This kills the bark, and it can seriously damage or even kill the whole tree.
So what's the solution? Well, it's surprisingly simple. You give your tree sunscreen. You just mix up a 50-50 solution of regular white interior latex paint and water, and you paint the trunk. That white color reflects the sun, keeps the bark at a nice, stable temperature, and completely prevents that dangerous freeze-thaw cycle.
The second winter threat is, well, it's a lot more direct. When food gets scarce in the winter, the tender bark of your young apple tree looks like an all-you-can-eat buffet for voles, mice, and rabbits. They can chew a ring all the way around the trunk, which is called girdling, and that cuts off the flow of nutrients completely. It's a death sentence for the tree.
The best defense here is good offense, a physical barrier. A cylinder made from something called hardware cloth, which is just a sturdy metal mesh, is perfect. The details really matter, though. You have to bury it a few inches deep to stop animals from burrowing under it, and make sure it's tall enough to stick up above wherever you expect the snow to pile up, so rabbits can't just use the snow as a step stool to get to the bark.
And that's it. You've done it. You have successfully guided your tree through planting, its first growing season, and you've protected it from the absolute worst that winter can throw at it. You have officially built the foundation for a lifetime of delicious, homegrown apples.
So that wraps up our look at an apple tree's critical first year. If you found this helpful, do me a favor and give it a like. And be sure to subscribe for more guides just like this one. Thanks for watching.